Hello again. Something which never occurs to most of us is that our view of the past is usually shaped not by history books and painstaking research, but rather by literature. Think about working class people in London in the 19th century, and you're sure to conjure up the image of Oliver Twist and the Artful Dodger. Uh, Consider Victorian governesses, and Jane Eyre springs unbidden to our minds. Few of us ever take the trouble actually to investigate facts and figures relating to the past, preferring to rely upon easily accessible ideas which we have gleaned from fictional books and films. Pirates? We think of Long John Silver, Captain Hook, and even Captain Jack Sparrow. This is, of course, fine if the books and the films made from them are reasonably accurate in their descriptions of the past. Most famous writers took great pains with ensuring that their novels were realistic and truly reflected the time about which they were writing. The French Revolution, for instance, took place 20 years before Charles Dickens was even born, but A Tale of Two Cities is meticulous in its recreation of that time and place. Anybody reading it will get as good a feel for that period of history as somebody reading Carlyle's History of the French Revolution. This is why there is something a little alarming about modern films, television series, and adaptations of books. Those of us who grew up taking our ideas about Victorian London from Dickens are likely to have a fairly good feel for how the city actually was at that time. In other words, our knowledge of the past, although it is acquired from fiction, is nonetheless pretty accurate. A young person today, though, who picks up his or her ideas about the past from television and books, is going to grow up with a weird and distorted notion of what this country was once like. There was, for example, an awful lot of naked and unashamed racism in Britain during the 19th and much of the 20th centuries. Older people know this very well. This is, however, being erased from history. Television dramas set in the 1950s or 1930s now show black people mixing easily with white people, encountering no racism whatsoever. Some drama set in an English village in 1950 will have a black vicar, Indian teacher, and so on, with nobody making any remark on this and simply behaving as though it's really 2023. This is at best bizarre, but it also removes a large chunk of actual history. The same process is being undertaken with books. Anybody reading novels written right up to the 70s and 80s will come across the so-called N-word frequently used. It's the whenever race is mentioned, whether it's in G.K. Chesterton's Father Brown stories, Brideshead Revisited, any other book or novel you care to mention, there will be casual mentions of racism. The N-word, of course, is now being removed from all books published in the past. So even Ian Fleming books are being edited to remove those words. The result is that the fact that racism was very widespread in the past in this country is slowly but surely being eradicated. The latest adaptation of Great Expectations, showing on the BBC, has a successful barrister in London in the 1850s who is black, and he has a chief clerk who is Indian. This is absolutely extraordinary because nobody seems to care a bit about their ethnicity. In this way, young people are being taught subliminally two untruthful things. They will absorb these things by osmosis without even noticing, just as we in the past absorbed ideas about poor people in Victorian London from watching, say, the film of Oliver Twist, the one with Alec Guinness as Fagin. The first false idea which they will be given is that this country was always multiracial and full of black people. The second is a little more insidious. It is that in the past there was actually no racism and everybody got on well with everybody else of any ethnicity. This is of course nonsense, but the message is that this is the natural state of affairs, and that if we see racism or any awareness of a difference between ethnicities today, then this is a weird thing. After all, as far back as Victorian times, there was no racism at all, and everybody in England accepted everybody else without even noticing the colour of their skin. Racism must therefore be some kind of modern aberration. They hear a lot about it now. Young people are always hearing about racism, but when they think about the past, it seems it didn't exist. It's something which has arisen recently. I don't say that so-called colourblind casting is designed to propagate this perspective, but that's certainly one effect. Obviously, large-scale immigration too must have been operating hundreds of years ago because there were so many black people about in those days, according to films and television. Why are people making a fuss about it now? Because that too, like an absence of racism, has been the natural state of things for hundreds of years. In this way, a very peculiar and specific situation lasting for a few recent decades, that is to say, mass immigration, is shown to young people as being a traditional part of Old England and the way that their country has always been. All this may not be intentional brainwashing and indoctrination, but that is certainly how it affects children and young folk.